Good morning, everyone, and welcome to one of, I hope, is the first of many webinars conducted through LawPath. My name is Michael Cosgrove. I'm an associate with Workplace Law Specialists, and I'll be running you through the webinar today entitled Workplace Bullying, A Time for Action. As most of you will know, workplace bullying is not a new phenomenon. It is very much a real occurrence in the workplace, and it has always occurred. But the increase in reporting and obviously the attempts to deal with workplace bullying has obviously brought that more into the public eye, particularly over the past few years. So what we're going to obviously explore today is three aspects: risk management strategies, incident controls, and obviously the legal frameworks that are currently in place to deal with workplace bullying. Now, typically, workplace bullying can take many forms. It's not just a physical action; it is obviously also an emotional action that takes place. You would possibly think that, in all honesty, that the actual emotional side of bullying is actually far more complex and has a far greater impact on the victims as such than what a physical altercation would. And that's actually becoming more and more prevalent, that the emotional side of bullying has a far more detrimental effect. Now, it can be instigated and affect all peoples at all levels of employment. It's not just the factory floor worker or the office clerk or one of those smaller positions. Workplace bullying can occur right up, including the CEO and board members and directors of companies. So it's not just relegated to one class of worker within a company. It can include abuse of power, isolation, alienation of employees, and it can take all forms. It can be harmless innuendo or sarcasm, inappropriate jokes, teasing somebody about their weight or sexuality, or even something as simple as name calling. One aspect of it that you need to make sure is that to be able to distinguish between managing and bullying. That's probably one of the things that employers are currently struggling with at the moment, is riding that fine line between what constitutes appropriate management as opposed to what the employee may perceive as bullying. And we'll touch on that a little bit later during the webinar. So look, today's webinar, as I said, it's designed to give you some tools that you can take away with you for each of the sessions. It's a fairly basic, fundamental actions that employers and employees can take to address bullying in the workplace. Addressing bullying in the workplace is very difficult. Each workplace is different. All the employees are different, both culturally and also it's not just the male-female aspect of things. So it is possibly one of the more difficult situations in the workplace for employers to deal with. So hopefully today's webinar you'll be able to take away some tips and obviously hopefully some tools to just to give you a basic start on what you can do to address bullying in the workplace. It's split into three sessions, as I said: risk management strategies, incident control, legal frameworks. Just to give you an idea of the sections within the Act and how they actually translate to what you should be doing in terms of your policies and procedures as well, to make sure that you can clearly display that you've taken every step that you possibly can to negate the impact or occurrences of workplace bullying. Now, what is workplace bullying? As I was saying to you before, it can take many shapes, many forms. Basically, and this is actually a definition that has been used quite simply by a lot of unions when they've tried to tackle workplace bullying in employers before. Basically, the repeated, less favourable treatment of a person by another or others in the workplace, which may be considered unreasonable and inappropriate workplace practice. Now, as I said to you before, that can virtually be anything: intimidation, degrade or humiliate an employee, abuse of power, the isolation, inappropriate comments about somebody's appearance, inappropriate comments about their work performance can be perceived to be workplace bullying. There's a lot of talk at the moment about in various forums that I'm currently on at the moment in regards to comments about the smell of people's lunches in the lunchroom. It comes down to instances of what you would think are silly little things that shouldn't be create such a big problem. But unfortunately, as I said, because of the varying ethnicity of workers in workplaces these days, it's a very fine line about what is acceptable and what isn't, what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. So hopefully, as we go through, we'll be able to explore that a little bit more in detail. Now, the cost to the organisation. I mean, that's basically one of the biggest things is that workplace bullying can cost an organisation quite highly. From my perspective, I think that the impact is truly unmeasurable. You cannot put a definitive figure, be it dollar-wise, lost hours of production, lost revenue to the company. You really can't put a price, a figure on that. So the main point is failing to take action, and primarily preventative action. And I'm hoping this is what you'll get out of today's session. It will negate the impact: high absentee rates, low morale, low productivity, increased work cover issues, discrimination claims, criminal action. Criminal action primarily is more possibly to do with the physical altercations that may actually occur in the workplace. So, as I was saying before, I think the cost to the organisation is unmeasurable. I mean, the cost to an individual is fairly unmeasurable as well. I mean, increased anxiety, low self-esteem, the loss of financial security, primarily because absenteeism from work. Employees are only given certain levels of leave with which to deal with these type of issues. So it could get to a point where they're actually, and in industrial relations, it's actually called leave without pay. So it could actually start quite significantly impacting them financially as well. Loss or deterioration of personal relationships. I mean, if a worker, and I shouldn't just say just a worker, it could be management, as I said, right up to the CEO, board of directors. Bullying can have quite an emotional impact on an individual, and you tend to take that home with you. So I mean, the stress and anxiety and the loss of self-esteem can have quite a significant impact on personal relationships. Depression, physical illness, there's a whole range of impacts on the actual individuals that, once again, I think is unmeasurable. Primarily, what you have to do, as the slide shows, we need to take preventative action. You need to be able to display that you've taken every opportunity you possibly can to mitigate the impact, if not stamp out bullying in the workplace. I know that sounds like a utopian thought, but if you start big and work your way down, you will actually achieve something. Now, risk management strategies, let's start with that. Taking proactive steps in the workplace can significantly minimize the potential for bullying to occur. I can't reiterate the fact enough that you need to be on the front foot when it comes to bullying, and you need to take steps and implement some really simple strategies that in your workplace to combat the bullying. As I was saying before, you have to remember that employees are all different. It's not just male, female, culturally, morally, ethically. Every employee is different. Every employee will see something that they may think is reasonable or the rest of the employees may think is unreasonable. So you may actually get caught up in a workplace bullying type scenario without actually even realising it. So what are some simple strategies? Organising, union organisers 101. Use a collective approach. This can be applied to employers as well. Empower the employees to assist others when bullying is evident. A lot of employees will actually withdraw and possibly feel bullied themselves purely by witnessing a bullying confrontation. What you want to be able to do, and the prime reason why the employees withdraw, isn't necessarily because they themselves feel bullied, but because they fear that there might be repercussions on them if they get involved in it. So using a collective approach, let the employees know that if they do witness a bullying incident, that they can get involved, okay? That they can render assistance to the person being bullied, and it won't disadvantage them in any way. So the best time for a bullying incident to be addressed is when the bullying incident occurs. A lot of bullying incidences are one-on-one and don't necessarily have any witnesses, but the ones that do, empower those employees to assist. So that's the whole idea about approaching it as a collective. Hold regular meetings, toolbox talks. Most blue collar employees have them. They hold them fairly regularly. It's usually around health and safety, which is pretty much where workplace bullying sits. It is a core health and safety issue in the workplace. So if the company is holding regular toolbox talks, make sure that bullying is on the agenda all the time. Okay, make sure that it is a set agenda item. Openly discuss any issues and reinforce to the employees that bullying of any kind will not be tolerated in the workplace. That is probably one of the core points where your strategy actually commences. That is being able to, as I said, clearly show that you're taking every step possible when an incident does actually occur. It will show the commission, should the incident end up in the commission to be looked at, that you have educated your employees on all levels. As I said to you, it's not just the factory floor workers, it's all levels up to the CEO. Educated them around the workplace policies, that bullying is not tolerated in the workplace, and that there are consequences for undertaking or being involved or instigating a bullying situation. So that is part of that's a core strategy, basically, is to ensure that those employees are regularly updated on that requirement. Ensure employees are aware of their rights. Now, even though they are obligated to adhere to codes of conduct, values and behaviours within the workplace, they do actually have rights. Now, where necessary, you could probably work individually with the employees to, if they are undertaking unacceptable practices or behaviours. As I said to you before, because of the varying ethnicity within the workplace, as I said to you, it's not simply a case of that the behaviour is deemed to be automatically deemed to be unreasonable, therefore they should be terminated from their employment. It could be a cultural thing, like their behaviour or what they're actually doing that some other employees feel may be of a workplace bullying nature. They may actually not see it as workplace bullying, and they may be doing it quite innocently without knowledge that it is actually an unacceptable practice or an unacceptable behaviour. So it is okay to work individually with them to ensure that those are identified, and obviously how they can handle those different situations, how they can possibly change their actions or change any process that they undertake to make sure that they're actually not displaying those behaviours in the workplace. Now, this part, develop a robust workplace policy. I can't stress this enough. A policy backed up by a fairly concise procedure is a paramount strategy in the workplace. It gives the employees clear direction on both what is acceptable behaviour or unacceptable behaviour. The procedure gives them their rights and also a clear-cut step-by-step process in how to deal with workplace bullying in the workplace. So a policy backed by a procedure on how to deal with the incidents, including contacts for employees. A lot of the larger employees have access to employee assistance programs, EAP. Smaller businesses don't, but obviously small to medium businesses have the capacity to get assistance. Even the Ombudsman or the Commission will assist with basic advice. There are obviously a number of consultants, law firms, employer associations around that the smaller to medium businesses can actually can contact for assistance. It must include a procedure for how to report a bullying incident. A lot of the cases that I have handled for unfair dismissal claims have been based around a bullying incident or a perceived bullying incident. And the first thing I've always asked is, what steps did you take to report that bullying, and what was the employer's approach to that complaint? And it's a fairly high percentage that the employees just were not aware of any type of basic procedure on how to report the bullying incident. So it's paramount that that procedure has it. They need to be able to have a document that's easily accessible, easy to understand, and details a fairly simple process on how they go about reporting the bullying incident and having the employer actually deal with that. Like any policy or procedure, there needs to be regular training sessions for the managers and employees. The policy and procedure needs to be easily accessible, and there needs to be an understanding by the managers and the employees of the actual policy, and they need to make sure that that if they have any questions, that there's a point of contact where they can actually get more information. A lot of employees, in terms of how they deal with workplace bullying, there's a number of different little strategies to actually for the employees, or for the victim, for them to be able to put in their own personal life to be able to deal with that. Speaking to the offender, this would be totally dependent upon obviously the nature of the bullying. If it's obviously been some sort of physical bullying in the workplace, I certainly wouldn't recommend that they speak to the offender. But if it's something along the lines of just harmless innuendo or jokes, or a bit of name calling or something like that, it is empowering for the victim to be able to possibly speak to the offender and just say, look, the comments that you made, I feel are very inappropriate in the workplace, and I don't appreciate them, and I'd like you to stop. Sometimes, most of the time, that will actually work, because there is a high percentage of bullies that don't realise that their behaviour or their actions, they're actually bullying the other employee. They think it's a joke when the employee actually doesn't think it's a joke at all. Obviously involving a third party to speak to the bullying. I mean, if there are obviously cliquey groups within employers where strong friendships are formed, so it may actually be appropriate, once again, depending upon the incident, where the victim may be able to ask one of their friends, look, can you just tell that particular employee over there to cease this behaviour? And they may actually feel comfortable in doing that. Once again, that may actually be a strategy that will work for them. It's very difficult to plan any responses to possible bullying situations. As we'll touch on a little bit further, each bullying case is possibly going to be different, but the impact on the individual and the organisation is nearly always inherently the same. So whilst it's very difficult to say, and it is very difficult to plan responses to possible bullying situations. You just simply can't plan for every single scenario that may come into the workplace. So, from an individual's perspective, you can do some planning on how you think you will deal with bullying in the workplace. Prior planning and preparation is good, but I think taking into account dependent upon what the actual bullying situation is, it's going to be very difficult for you to plan for every situation. But it might be something that the employee could do to make a conscious effort on trying to mitigate the impact on themselves by undertaking some personal development courses or something along those lines, just to give them a little bit of empowerment and planning around how they may react or deal with bullying in the workplace. Now, there's a 4-step process to preventing bullying in the workplace. Identify the risk, and this is primarily from an employer's perspective. Assess the risk. So you need to it's a basic risk assessment as you would conduct with any workplace health and safety issue. What aspects? What strategies you're going to implement to control the risk, and there's obviously got to be always a monitoring and review process at the end of it. So, identifying the risks is obviously the first step. Observe inappropriate behaviours in the workplace. I recommend this be undertaken. Any new manager coming into a new business, whilst they may understand the nature of the business, the sector that the business is in, they understand manufacturing processes and all that type of aspect of the business. It's a whole brand new load of employees. So I recommend it if you're an incoming manager or supervisor or team leader, you're fresh into the business. I would take time, in all honesty, to observe. When employees aren't aware that they're being observed, you always get them in their natural state. None of their behaviours are forced. They're fairly honest and open in their behaviours and the way they communicate. So observing them and observing for the inappropriate behaviours, don't use it as a disciplinary tool. Use it as an upskilling, a management tool for you to be able to develop appropriate strategies to deal with those behaviours. Changes in the behaviours. This is more directed towards those managers that have been in the employer a lot longer. So, have behaviours changed? Has a once quiet, compliant, for want of a word, employee, have they started to be loud, boisterous? Have they started to use inappropriate language? You've got to remember that in some instances, also, something may be happening in the employee's personal life that may be quite significantly impacting them, and they may actually be bringing that to work, and the behaviours that they display at work may be a direct correlation between what they're experiencing at home. So that you need to make sure that if there's any changes in the employee behaviours, that you possibly get onto those behaviours fairly quickly, because as I said, there may be actually something occurring in their personal life that they may need assistance with addressing. Observe the changes in the workplace environment. Look, that's focused purely on, say, for example, a decrease or increase in workload for an employee or a section of employees. You move from a small building to a large building, or vice versa. There's been some actual physical changes within the work environment. New machines, new processes, less machines, restructures and redundancies. There's always a chance that during a turbulent time within the business and the workplace environment as such, that the likelihood of a workplace bullying incident occurring is fairly much higher than what it would be during the normal operations or just the ongoing operations of the business. So you need to be more aware of workplace bullying when there's turbulent changes in the environment. Now, assess the risks. Ask yourself some basic questions. What's the probability of workplace bullying occurring? So, what's the demographic of the workforce? Is it predominantly male, predominantly female, a good mix? It's not inappropriate, and I've never seen it as inappropriate as looking at the different cultures within the business, because there are different cultures that don't mix very well, which will have an impact and could cause some workplace bullying instances to occur. What is the business's current processes for addressing the complaints? Do you have a workplace policy? Do you have a procedure that clearly indicates the process for the employees to undertake to have the workplace bullying addressed? Is there tools there for the managers and the supervisors for them to be able to use to address a workplace bullying incident when it occurs? Those are the types of things you need to look at. What considerations have been given to the financial, moral, and legal costs of bullying? Okay, well that's fairly self-explanatory. What have you tried to put a quantifiable figure on what it would cost the organisation if a bullying incident occurred, or what considerations have you done? Have been given to that impact on the business? Do additional steps need to be taken to prevent and or resolve workplace bullying in the workplace? So you've gone through, you've identified the risks. Okay, you've identified behaviours. You've identified some employees that need to quite possibly be spoken to around their behaviours. You've noted current changes or any pending changes in the workplace environment that may be coming up, say for example, in the next 6 to 12 months. So you've then looked at, that there being what's the probability of it actually occurring. You've gone through. You've done a little bit of an audit on what your current processes are. Do you have a policy? Do you have a procedure? What's been the history of complaints in the workplace around bullying, and so forth? And you've mapped all that out. So do you need to take additional steps? Do you need to have increased collective action? Do you need to have managers reinforce the requirements in the bullying policy and procedure at toolbox talks? Like, do you educate the employees enough? Is the workplace bullying policy and procedure adequate enough? It's always been a case of, once again, the same as walking the fine line as to whether or not too much or not enough information is contained in policies. There is never a case of too much information in policies. The core issue that you need to focus on is whether or not the information in the policy is actually relevant to dealing with it. Policies, you can write policies that are pages and pages long, but is everything in that policy relevant to actually dealing with it? Employees aren't necessarily worried about having legal terminology and so forth in policies. They just want to know what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, and how to deal with something when it actually occurs. So I've always been of the opinion that you can have fairly detailed workplace policies, but you need to make sure that it's actually understandable. Like, can the employees actually understand it? Do they know what it's about? Do they know what the consequences are? And that goes for not just workplace bullying. That's with every other policy in the workplace as well. Controlling the risk. This is the critical step, and funnily enough, this step actually requires its own three-stage approach. Now, consultation. The Fair Work Commission is fairly strict on consultation when it comes to matters that they're dealing with. Consultation and commitment is required when dealing with workplace bullying. It's not just a case of it's the employee's issue to deal with, or it's just the employer's issue to deal with. It's everybody in the workplace. Every single person in the workplace is responsible for safety, and that's what workplace bullying comes down to. It is a safety issue within the business, so everybody is responsible for safety. So there needs to be consultation and commitment by all parties. And now that does actually include for companies who are heavily unionised. Unions are very big on workplace health and safety. So there needs to be a commitment from the unions to address bullying in the workplace. There needs to be a commitment from the employees, and there needs to be a commitment from the employer on all levels, as I said to you before. Up to the CEO and board need to be committed fully to stamping out workplace bullying. Now, control measures must be developed, and anti-bullying strategies must then be implemented. So your anti-bullying strategies are your toolbox talks, your bullying policy and procedures. If you're looking at implementing a employee assistance program, well, they need to be across what strategies you're using as well. Also, if there's going to be, say for example, you're going to appoint particular individuals, your health and safety reps within the business, well, they'll need to be fully aware of what strategies are going to be implemented, and also what they're going to be doing within the business. What's their role in the whole great big context of dealing with workplace bullying in the business. Now, it's imperative at this stage that, as I said to you before, you have a full involvement of the employees as well as management. It comes back to that collective action. Collective action I think is the best way of dealing with workplace bullying. And I think collective action is the best way of taking that first step to making sure that you've got the strategies in place to deal with it before it happens. Okay, it's not just the responsibility of HR. It's not just the responsibility of the business owner or the CEO or the workplace health and safety officer. It is the responsibility of everybody within that workplace. Okay, let's have a look. Consultation and commitment. Look, everybody knows small to medium businesses are time poor. They just don't have the access or readily available HR support right then and there. As I said, they do have the ability to access assistance from organisations and other consultants and law firms. LawPath has a great facility where you can access help fairly quickly and fairly easily. So if if a small and medium business can't access adequate support right then and there, it is advisable to try and mediate the immediate conflict and separate the parties as best you can, and then address the issue. So you need to calm the issue down as best you can, and then go away and seek support to do that. So consultation and commitment. Look, it's as small to medium businesses, easiest thing, employee survey or an anonymous suggestion box. Make it clear to the employees that you are opening up the communications line. You want to know what's happening in the business. Some employees are very reluctant to put their name on anything in terms of suggestions or complaints as such. They're they're scared of doing it. As I said to you before, scared of what the repercussions might be, particularly if their complaint or issue is in regards to perhaps a manager or a immediate supervisor or team leader or somebody of that nature. So they're fairly fairly adverse to putting it their name to it. So the anonymous suggestion box or the anonymous complaint box, an employee survey. Whilst it sounds a bit tacky, it is an effective way of opening up communication with the employees, and it also does give you a fairly accurate picture of the business. As I said to you before, when employees don't realise that they're being observed, that's when you get them at their true state. So if they don't have to put their name to anything, you'll find that you'll actually get fairly open and honest responses to any questions. But like I said, it's just that first step in opening the communications lines if you don't have that rapport with the staff to start with. As I said to you before, look, no two bullying incidents are going to be identical. I've never come across any bullying instances that were exactly the same as the previous one I've dealt with. So, however, they're pretty much almost identical in how they impact the business and its employees. For the business, it impacts, as we said before, low morale, decreased productivity. It can have quite a significant financial impact on the business. Employees, same thing. As we said before, increased anxiety, effects on personal relationships and so forth. So the incidences may never ever be the same, but the impact on it is on the business and the employees is nearly always is the same. Now, control measures. Said it before. Develop a robust workplace bullying policy, backed by a procedure, particularly a detailed complaints procedure. It's not always the case that the employees will read the policy. Everybody is fairly up on what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. What they will possibly have difficulty with is obviously how they deal with that complaint. What steps do they need to do? What do they need to put it in writing first, or do they need to go speak to the individual first to try and resolve the issue? Do they just go straight to the CEO? Do they write a letter of complaint to the board of directors? What do they do? So that needs to be with the policy, and it needs to be a procedure that's fairly easy for both the employee making the complaint and also giving fairly clear and concise directions on or advice on how it's actually going to be handled. That definitely needs to be included. Unions are big on charters, so this is probably more for the unionised environment. Charter of Employee Rights. Most of those that I've actually seen will have links directly to ILO, International Labour Organization, various ACTU communications and what they think should be done to address workplace bullying. Charter of Employee Rights is not a bad thing. It will just give them more details about what those external third-party organisations think are their rights and think how workplace bullying should be approached by the employer. What the employer needs to worry about is the policy and procedure. But Charter of Employee Rights is not a bad thing to have. Code of conduct. Most businesses, even small to medium businesses, I've seen have a code of conduct of some sorts. Some are more highly detailed than others. They have fairly clear and concise requirements for the adherence to values and behaviours, which is primarily where workplace bullying instances sit, where the employer says that you breach the code of conduct by not adhering to the values and behaviours of the organisation. So code of conducts are fairly standard in bigger businesses, but they obviously differ from business to business. But certainly a code of conduct will complement any policy and procedure that you put in place. Periodic monitoring and evaluation of the work environment to ensure policy compliance. Now that sounds like a lot of big words, fairly garbled. Basically what it means is that your monitor and review process. Are are your workers, do your workers understand the policy? Do your workers understand the procedure? Do they know what the values and behaviours are? Do they know where the policy and procedure is located? Do they know who they can speak to? Are their behaviours changing? You know, it's a constant. Workplace bullying is a once you've got your policies and procedures set up, you're constantly in the state of monitoring and evaluating not just how the business is dealing with any issues, but how the business is actually remaining compliant in terms, or sorry, how the employees are remaining compliant to the policies and procedures. I mean, are they starting to get a bit lax with their behaviours? You know, is the employee assistance program, you know, is that still relevant, or are they actually dealing with the employees' concerns effectively? You know, do you need to change providers? It's a constant monitoring and review process that needs to be undertaken. It can't just be set up and left sit there and cross your fingers and hope it continues to work. Implement anti-bullying strategies. Look, that's fairly self-explanatory. As I said to you before, I think developing a collective approach is the best way to do it. Making everybody responsible for workplace bullying, and everybody responsible for dealing with that. Consistent, stay on message. You know, that's basically what I mean by consistent, and constant education. Make sure that every single toolbox talk. Now, this is probably more relevant in the bigger businesses, but make sure that if there's 6 toolbox talks a day for shift changes or just the sheer number of employees in the workplace, or make sure that the message about workplace bullying is exactly the same the 6 times that it's actually done in those toolbox talks. Constant education. It doesn't need to be daily, but every time there is an avenue for communication with the employees, make sure that workplace bullying stays on the agenda, so that it's actually the message is constantly reinforced to the employees. Now, a contact officer. Now, that contact officer doesn't necessarily need to be the workplace health and safety officer. Employers are able to appoint. I would run it as an elective position. Appoint employees within the organisation as contact officers, as points of contact for people who are able to go to them and confidentially discuss anything, any workplace bullying issues that they may have or perceive that they have, because it may be a case of the employees are actually more likely to open up to another employee that they trust, as opposed to a manager or a supervisor or a business owner. So a contact officer, it's not just a position where anybody should be appointed to it, because you certainly don't want to appoint an actual bully as the contact officer. So there needs to be a little bit of work put into that, but it is an option for employers to do that, to appoint those people into that position to help the employees through. Now, monitor and review process. As I was saying to you before, you're constantly doing that with workplace bullying. It's once you've got your policies and procedures set up, you know, and they've been rolled out into the business. All the employees are fully aware of their obligations, their rights. It's a constant monitoring and review process. Now, the easiest way to review that is obviously through observation. You know, changes in the work environment, employee feedback sheets. As I've said to you before, the surveys and anonymous suggestion boxes and anonymous feedback boxes and so forth are a good tool for particularly small and medium businesses. But you need to obviously do that on a regular basis. You need to collect and evaluate that information. You need to make sure that the strategies that you've put in place are working effectively, And if they're not, you obviously need to make the any adjustments accordingly. You need to be able to make sure that your strategies adapt to the work environment, adapt to the demographic of your employees, and also make sure that your strategies keep pace with the current legislation and acceptable industry practice. So, as I said to you before, monitoring and reviewing is probably the biggest step that you need to take, because it's a constant thing. You can develop policies and procedures reasonably quickly. You can roll them out into the workplace reasonably quickly, but constantly monitoring and reviewing it can be labour intensive. But you need to weigh up the risks as to whether or not a few hours a week to monitor and review those. Is that really a big impact going to be on the business when you go back and look at what the impact to the business will be had you not put a workplace bullying and policy and procedure in place, and what impact that would have on the business and the employees if you didn't. So now, incident control. Incident control is primarily focused on once an incident has happened. We obviously don't want to think ever that workplace bullying will ever happen. We don't want it to happen, but sometimes inevitably it does happen, and you need to be able to deal with that appropriately. Now, I've approached this the incident control aspect of it from the simple line that the incident has already occurred. There's already been a complaint, that it's a fairly serious issue. Now, not demeaning any workplace bullying in any way, shape, or form is serious. Some are obviously more serious than others. Some, as I said to you before, can be quite physical in nature, and you need to make sure that from a business perspective that you've as I said, that you've taken every step you can to mitigate the impact, but also to deal with the incident after it's actually occurred. Now, most instances, I would say all instances, need to be investigated in some manner. You will need to speak not only to the person making the complaint, but you'll quite possibly need to speak to the person who is the subject of the complaint, and any witnesses. So whilst you may only speak to one, maybe two people, it's still an investigation as such, and it will still be deemed as to be an investigation of the incident. I certainly don't advocate that any employer have either themselves or their own internal HR department conduct any workplace investigation. I think workplace investigations should be conducted by a completely 100% neutral outside party that has absolutely no connection to anybody within the business on a emotional or physical aspect. They're a completely independent person. That's to say that that's not always going to be an option for some employers. It's always a case that, particularly for small to medium businesses, there's going to be the business owner that needs to speak to any parties involved. So there are some underpinning principles of an investigation that I feel that every investigation must have, and they are natural justice and procedural fairness, standard of proof, confidentiality, and make sure that you support the person making the complaint and any witnesses, but maintain complete impartiality. So natural justice or procedural fairness, once again, that is another aspect that the Commission take a very, very serious view of when they are looking at instances of bullying or any instances or anything within the workplace, that requires an investigation to have been done, and any type of disciplinary action taken against employees. Has that person been awarded natural justice? Now, natural justice is basically a minimum standard of fairness that is applied. When investigating a complaint. Now, the person investigating the complaint should be impartial with no conflicts of interest, as I was saying to you before. The resolution of the complaint is to be done in a timely manner and with all the decisions and reasons provided in writing to the person making the complaint and the person accused. It is imperative that the person who is being accused, and this is where the natural justice kicks in more so, is that they are fully informed in writing of any complaint or complaints made against them and who the complaint has been made by. Given the opportunity to respond by stating their case and providing any explanation prior to any decision being made. Assured of a proper investigation of the complaint. Okay, now that comes down to the proper interviewing of witnesses, the proper accessing of perhaps it is email communications or written letter communications, but the conduct of the investigation must be impeccable. Assured that the person making the decision acts fairly and without bias. Okay, the person who is investigating the bullying incident should not be the person who makes the decision as to what will happen to the person who has been accused of the bullying. That comes back to complete impartiality. So if it is your intention to investigate a workplace bullying incident, you should not be the one that makes the decision as to what happens to the person who has been accused. Should the standard of proof, now the standard of proof refers to the degree of certainty with which contested facts must be established if they are accepted as proved. So basically what that means is that you have investigated the matter, you've given the accused person all the allegations, you've taken in their full and complete response, and you've looked at the standard of proof. Now, I mean, in civil proceedings, it's a balance of probabilities. In criminal trials, I think it's proved beyond a reasonable doubt, I think is the terminology that they used. IR is based purely on the balance of probabilities. So, you've investigated the matter and taking into account the full nature of the complaint, the full statements by all the witnesses and any other evidence that you've gathered, on the balance of probabilities, did that incident take place? Confidentiality is imperative. It is imperative that everybody within the investigation, the accused, the person that made the complaint, the witnesses, everybody involved directly in the complaint understands that confidentiality is imperative. Excuse me, and that they are not allowed to discuss the nature of any part of the investigation or the complaint into the investigation at any time. Now, support the person making the complaint. Well, that would be your first step. I mean, it's human nature to support the person that comes forward first as the aggrieved. But you need to make sure that you not just support the person who made the complaint. You need to support the person that they're complaining about, because it may be a case of they actually might be the ones being bullied. I've had a lot of cases where the person who made the complaint was actually the bully. So that comes back to maintaining the impartiality. And that comes back to, once again, why I said that if you're going to investigate the complaint, that you shouldn't be the one that makes the decision, because unfortunately, if you are not impartial, if you decide to take on the investigation yourself and not use an external third party, you run the risk of becoming emotionally involved in the actual investigation. Once you become emotionally involved in the investigation, you're no longer impartial, which makes it very, very difficult to properly investigate the matter, because you are drawn into it. So that's what I said to you before. I highly recommend that you don't investigate it, and that you seek some outside assistance in doing that. Okay, a couple of tips and hints. Investigating workplace bullying, or indeed any workplace issue, takes experience. It really does. To be able to question the complainant, questioning witnesses, it takes a lot of experience in doing that, to maintain that impartiality. I certainly wouldn't take on investigating a workplace bullying complaint or any workplace issue, unless I was 100% confident that that I could do it professionally and impartially as well. So that's what I said to you. I said, advisable, engage a competent external investigator. There are some specialist firms and consultants who have had a lot of experience doing workplace investigations. I've done quite a substantive number of investigations, so I'm confident that that I could do it, but I wouldn't take it on unless I was. So if you choose to investigate the complaint yourself, there are some basic investigative process along with some tips and hints. Interview the complainant first in a comfortable and relaxed area. Avoid high traffic areas such as lunchrooms or open offices. It's highly advisable to interview them in a quiet area. I know a lot of blue collar areas that I have dealt with have had a lot of outside like smokers areas that they've called them, and just tables and chairs away from the hustle and bustle of the main work area. I certainly wouldn't choose an office or a boardroom that is fairly close to any group of a group of employees. Particularly, the complainant is obviously going to be emotional, so they obviously don't want other staff members to see that emotion. Particularly if it's a male that's making the complaint. If it is of a very serious nature, guys do cry, so they may not want their mates to see that. So it is highly advisable that you remove them from the workplace as much as you possibly can into that comfortable and relaxed and quiet area to do it. Now, it's likely that they've opened up to other workers or indeed friends or family members. They may have said, over a quiet beer over the weekend, they may have come out and said what was going on. Allow them to have that support. Allow them to have that person as a support person. It doesn't necessarily need to be that person, but you have to allow them the option of bringing a support person to the interview. A support person is primarily there for moral support. You have to maintain control of the interview, and you need to reiterate to that support person that they're not there to answer the questions on behalf of the person being interviewed. Okay, they're not there to advocate for them. They're just purely there to support them through the process. I would allow a support person to seek clarification on a question. I would allow the support person to request that the interview that we can have a break from the interview, because they know the person inherently better than what I would. So they would know that they may actually need a break. They may need to step outside for a cigarette or a cup of coffee or just some fresh air. So I would allow the support person to ask for that. But as I said to you before, the support person is not there to interview with the core activity of interviewing and seeking clarity and details around the incident that occurred. They're not there to answer those questions on their behalf. So just need to make sure that the support person is fully aware of that, and that you maintain control of the interview while it occurs. Prepare your questions prior to the interview. Okay, don't go in there and try and be ad hoc with your questions. Have some core questions written down, ready to ask. Questioning is fairly simple. Who, what, when, where, and why. If you follow those basics, it's a good place to start for you to be able to do that. But certainly have as many questions in detail prepared prior to the interview. You're not obligated to give the complainant the questions before the interview. It's purely for your preparation to make sure that you've covered off and sought as much detail about the incident as you possibly can for yourself. So to be prepared, basically. Record as much detail in writing as possible. Documentation in writing is critical if disciplinary action is required later. You need to be able to clearly display what the question was, what the answer was. So it's getting as much detail on paper, as I said, is critical if you need to take any action later. Listen carefully to the complainant. As I said, they're going to be emotional. They're going to they might mumble, they might mix up dates, they might mix up times, they may actually mix up names of employees. They will feel a little bit threatened by the interview. Now you can try and negate that as much as you possibly can at the start of the interview by saying that you're just there gathering information, but they're still sitting in the boss's office answering questions about something that may have actually affected them quite emotionally or physically. So they are going to be a little bit scatterbrained. So you need to listen to them carefully. And if there's any issues, you need to clarify them at the time. So don't wait until the end of the interview to go back over any previous question or any previous detail that you may have actually spoken about. If you need to clarify it, clarify it right then and there while it's fresh in their mind. Don't try and rehash it a few minutes or hours or days later, because you'll more than likely get a different answer to what you originally got, or a different piece of information to what you originally got. So yeah, definitely listen carefully and clarify it straight away. Don't wait. Now, when interviewing possible witnesses, you've got to remember that it's to reinforce confidentiality. The witnesses are going to be quite possibly, in some instances, equally emotive as what the complainant is. Primarily because, as I said to you before, that sometimes witnesses to bullying feel just as aggrieved or just as scared as what the victim was. So you need to make sure that they're comfortable and that you reinforce them that there is a confidential interview, but they need to be open and honest about it. You need to make sure that they understand that if they aren't honest about what they tell you, if they provide you with false or misleading statements, it could severely jeopardize the investigation. It could inevitably cost somebody's employment that it actually shouldn't have. So certainly, interviewing witnesses takes a fairly different skill set to what it does in some instances to what it does actually interviewing the complainant. So you need to make sure, as I said, to reinforce all those aspects: honest, open communication, confidentiality, and don't tell lies. Tell the truth. They're not the ones in trouble, but what they say could determine whether or not somebody else loses their job. Gather and consider all the evidence. Nothing too big. There is nothing too small. Do not discount anything, any physical evidence or any statements. You've got to remember the simple point that I've always tell people is that something that you consider not important today might be vitally important tomorrow. There might be aspects of one witness's account that you think aren't relevant and sound a little bit dodgy, but when you put that together with statements by 2 or 3 other witnesses, it all of a sudden might make perfect sense, and you might get a clearer picture of what did and didn't happen. So you need to gather and consider all that evidence. Once you've gathered and considered all your evidence, it's important to make sure that if you choose to go down the disciplinary route, that the punishment must fit the crime. So too many times, in particular with a lot of the unfair dismissals that I've done, the punishment certainly did not fit the crime, and it has impacted the business on it from a financial perspective anyway, where they have had to actually pay out substantive compensation to an individual who quite possibly, who should not have been had his employment terminated, but could quite possibly have just had the situation remedied by placing some strategies in place and perhaps giving him a warning, a written warning. So you've got to remember that not to over-discipline people. Yeah, don't be excessive. Don't overreact, and just realise that an overreaction, discipline-wise, could have as equal, if not worse, financial impact on the business as to what the actual workplace bullying incident would have done. Single workplace bullying incident. Look, you know, it's the commercial future of the business. You've got to address every single workplace bullying or potential workplace bullying incident in the business. You've got to. You can't just let one slide and only deal with the big ones. You've got to make sure that everybody within your business is fully aware of the policies and processes, and also are fully aware of their current rights within the legal frameworks. Now, the legal frameworks is quite complex. It's going to be a little bit of a minefield for employers, I think, moving into the future. Fairly easy for employees. It's a case of fill out a form, pay a fee, and you can lodge a workplace bullying complaint. So it's not. It's certainly not a case of it's going to be a bad thing for employers to have to deal with this. It's just going to be something else for them to actually deal with. The legislation is fairly easy to deal with from an employer's perspective. It's no harder than an unfair dismissal application. The employee is allowed to obviously submit the details that they are wanting to do, and then obviously the employer, as part of the process, gets a right of reply. So one aspect of the Act is it doesn't actually define unreasonable behaviour, but unreasonable behaviour is from my perspective is simply defined as a behaviour that a reasonable person would see as unreasonable. Includes behaviour that is victimising, humiliating, intimidating, or threatening in nature. So, if you maintain that basic definition of unreasonable behaviour and apply it in the workplace bullying instance, you can actually put in the appropriate strategies to deal with that, particularly when it comes to it being a clash of cultures within the workplace. As I was saying before, the ethnicity of businesses is fairly is changing fairly day to day, fairly quickly. So it's a case of making sure that if you apply that definition of unreasonable behaviour and make sure that definition appears in your policy, I think that's another good additional step towards trying to mitigate the instances or mitigate the impact of bullying within the workplace. Now, if you have a look, there's two forms: Form 72, Order to Stop Bullying; Form 73, which is the employer's response. You can have a look at both the forms. They are fairly detailed from both the employee lodging the application and from the employer response. If you have a look at, say for example, Form 72, there is specific mention of performance management or disciplinary action, and specific mentions of bullying policy and a dispute or grievance resolution procedure. So they are fairly specific with those two requirements. Was the employee under performance management and felt that the way the manager was dealing with them was bullying? That's the fine line that I spoke about at the start of the webinar. So. If you have a look at those two forms, as I said, they're fairly specific in terms of the information that is required. Same as unfair dismissal. Unfair dismissal for any reason, whether it be performance or through restructures or restructure or redundancy. You've got to make sure that your documentation and your policies and procedures are completely up to date. There can't be any grey area. Any grey area just allows for a ruling by the Commission against the employer in favour of the employee. So as I said to you, prior planning and preparation is paramount when dealing with any claim against the business through Fair Work, and this claim, the order to stop bullying, is no different. You need to be able to clearly display that you have given every opportunity for an employee to deal with a complaint through a proper complaints procedure. You need to make sure that all the employees are fully aware or fully educated and had that education reinforced on a fairly periodical basis of what behaviours are and aren't acceptable within the business, and that you've documented as much as you possibly can in terms of compliance to the strategies that you've implemented and what monitoring and review processes that you've undertaken to make sure that those strategies are still relevant. If a workplace bullying incident occurs, it comes back to the investigation, how you handle that bullying, up to and including the disciplinary part. How you conducted that investigation will come into the spotlight should a claim be made through Fair Work. So you need to make sure that the way that you conducted that investigation was ethical, that the principles of natural justice or procedural fairness was applied, that all the evidence was gathered and taken into consideration, that the person who had the complaint made against them, that their responses to that complaint was fully taken into account, that they had adequate time to give that response, they were allowed a support person through the whole process, and did the punishment fit the crime. So there's a lot of things to deal with when it comes to directly dealing with bullying, from opening the doors of your business to standing in the commission. So I'm hoping that this webinar has given you an insight into workplace bullying and given you a basic starting point from where you can develop or seek assistance to develop appropriate policy, an appropriate procedure within your organisation, appropriate communication strategy on how to effectively communicate that with your workforce using whatever means that you have available, and also in dealing once a complaint is made, how you actually deal with that, what processes that you've got in place. Undertaking investigations and so forth. So, finally, to close off, this decision that you're looking at through Commissioner Hampton was fairly clear and concise in terms of being able to put a lot of context around what was considered reasonable management action. This comes down to what I said at the start of the webinar about walking the fine line between managing and bullying an employee. I think this decision was actually quite good. So I would highly recommend that you go through and have a read of that decision. I think it was fairly clear and concise. There was basically 4 key points from the Commissioner that came out of the hearing of this application. So it's I think it would be good for you to have a read of that. It really determined that the applicant had not been bullied at work. They had actually been subjected to reasonable management actions, a reasonable level of management, and that as I said, that they weren't actually bullied as defined by the Act. Look, that concludes the webinar today. Look, thanks everybody for taking part and having a listen. I hope I've given you enough information to go away and look at your business, look at what steps you're taking to mitigate the risk and mitigate the impact of workplace bullying in your organisations. As you can see, my contact details there on that last slide. Feel free to contact me contact me directly. I can obviously assist. I've been involved in the establishment of a lot of workplace policies and procedures and rolling those out in businesses for a long time now. So from both the perspective of a union, from the union side of the fence to obviously the employer's representatives. So I've got a fairly good insight in how to do that and do that effectively with your workforce. So thanks very much for everybody participating today. It's been a great session. I've really enjoyed it, and as I said, I hope you've taken away enough information to hopefully start to deal with workplace bullying in your workplace. Thanks very much.